Well, hello there. Hi guys. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Karen, and if you're new here, welcome to my crafty quilting designs. So today we are going to make a scrappy quilt. I have so much scraps that I really need to get rid of, and so today is going to be one of those days whereby we do a lot of just free sewing. And what do I mean by free sewing? I mean simplified, stress-free, no matching of seams, no cutting of any design or anything like that, just simply sewing together. So I have all of my mess on the table. I have even my little bin on the table where I can put all my little bits of scraps into, and I'm going to show you what I've been doing. So I'm also going to use the scraps batting as well. So I'm going to sew my battings together and make a quilt top. This is all the batting I have left. This is all, but I do have big pieces of scrap batting, so I'm going to use this here. I'm not sure how much this is. It's probably 1.5 meters left, and I'm going to sew it together with the rest of it and see where I get from it. So I have made some blocks already, but I'm going to show you my process. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not working with small pieces of fabric. I don't ever do that because for me, I don't want to be spending a lot of time doing this. The cuts or the pieces of fabrics I will be using is like leftover from the quilt. So for example, the border, the sashing, fat quarters, and those are the sort of scraps that I actually keep, you know. I am not necessarily using small bits of fabrics. I don't usually do that, to be honest. I may keep those smaller bits. I mean, anything above from 3 inches I will keep. Anything 2.5 I'd usually kind of chuck because I don't have the space for it, and I don't like clutter. That's not me. I like things to be open, free, and I can see where bits are. Even if it's the fabric scrap box is chaotic, at least I know it's big pieces in there that I can make a big quilt. So I'm not going to be using small pieces. So you might see me using pieces like this. If it's already sewn together, yes, I will use it, because to me this is probably about a 5-inch square. All right, so something like this I would use. The concept that I'm going with is using whole pieces. So for example, let me show you what I've done. So something like this. Something like this I would actually use, and I've just added on a little piece at the top there to make up the length that I'm working with. So I'm using 9 inches in length. That's it. As long as it's 9 inches, I'm going to use that. I'm not worried about how wide it is. Even if it comes up to 9 inches by 2.5 or 9 inches by 3, it is going to get chucked in there. If you heard the door, that was just my husband. Sweetie? He's not there anyway. I think he's walked through. All right, so that's the idea of the quilt. I'll show you another one. So like that, again, 2 separate pieces just joined together. All right, so if I have something that's like this with a little bit of fabric in between, I will cut it down and make it to the length. So ideally that is what I am working with. So something like this definitely keep. So this was probably some strips of fabric, 2.5. I would use that and make it to the length that I'm using. So it's going to be a large pieces of scraps that I'm putting together to make an entire scrap quilt. I am not going to be adding any sashings or anything like that in between, nothing of that sort. The whole thing is just going to be joined together. So I'm looking forward to see what it actually comes out like. I do have some pre-made blocks, but I don't think I want to use them. The reason why I'm saying that is I want to show them to you as I'm talking. They're like this. So what I tend to do sometimes, I haven't done it for a while in all honesty, is that once I am making a quilt and I've got some scraps left, I may just sew it into a pattern. Now this is lovely, but I don't want that pattern in there. I'll show you another one that I have. Let me see. So something like this. This is very old. This is literally probably about 2 years old, this piece of scrap. I know, right? This is actually for my butterfly a general butterfly quilt, this particular block here. So I'm not going to be using this because I don't think it falls into the idea of this scrappy quilt. So any pre-made blocks that it doesn't have, that doesn't look like this, you know, sort of the two strips of fabric together, is I won't be using it. All right, but that's a good idea if you want to get into something like that. So as I said in the past, what I will do is once I'm finished making a quilt, I will just simply sew something together into a pattern. Another thing that I'm not using, and I'm getting my big bin here of all the scraps that I have, I am not going to be using any small pieces like this. So I'll just bring it because I know the light is there. So I'm not going to be using anything like that. All right. Yes, it again. So some of these are like, if I want to work out a pattern, I will just do it on scraps and make it up. And then what I tend to do is make up a scrappy quilt with just blocks, just random blocks basically. All right. So things like this, I'm not sure if I want to use it, even though this is nice and pretty. But what I'm definitely not going to use, and I hope you're getting my idea here. And let me see. All right, so I will choose this one. So anything little pieces like this. So little squares like that, I'm not interested in doing that. I am not making that kind of quilt. So it's a very large pieces of fabric. So as I said, 9 inches across, probably by 9 by 6, 9 by 4, 9 by 3, 9 by 2. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's 9 inches, that's the most important thing. So I'm going to spin the camera around and show you my mess, and then you will see how I actually put one or two together. And as I form them, I sew them, and I'll show you my stack, and then that's it basically, and then we will see where we go from there. So it's a very quick quilt, she says, hopefully. All right, so this is my chaotic mess here. So as you can see, I have a few bits of on the table, and this is my pile here that I have already made. I have not counted how much I have actually made here. I'm not really bothered about that, to be honest. I'm just going to keep going until I am happy with the amount, and then I'm going to start sewing them in rows. So as I said, not too worried about how wide or how narrow it is. As you can see, it's just really different cuts I'm putting together, but I am trimming them up so that it's nice and even. So when I start sewing, it's easy to put together. Any little piece just simply goes into my little bin right here. Okay, so again, something like this I'm keeping, and all I'm doing basically is just making sure it is 9 inches. Why 9 inches? No particular reason. Accidentally cut it, the first one 9. I intended 10, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to use it, but I'm just going to keep everybody to 9. And that's simply how I came up with it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and that's it. Now, few of the fabrics, so this to me now is waste. So few of the fabrics is going to be repeated, but I'm not worried about it because I won't be placing them in the same area. So that's fine basically. All right, so again, extra strip here. I'm going to leave that for now, because I think I've got enough of that color. I've got this nice gray bit here that I'm going to use. And even though it's a little bit on the thick side, I am going to just simply fold it in half. I'm sure you've gotten the gist of where I'm going with this, and just cut it down the middle. Even if I cut it smaller, it doesn't really matter. Now for me, when I'm making the scrap quilt, it is like anything goes. I don't necessarily worry about, you know, what color goes to what color. I just simply just sew. So something like that, as you can see, it is not straight, the white fabric. I'm still going to sew it together. So for now, I'll just cut it to the length that I want, so which is 9 inches. So I will just cut it, and then that way when I sew it, it's already done. So what I have been doing is just cutting them down. I like to count, even though I know it's 9, I still like to count. I'm getting them in the pairs that I want and place them on the side. So when I go to the sewing machine, it is already done. Now, if I wanted to add another piece to this, I can, but ideally I have been keeping them into 2 pieces, to be honest. I haven't really been doing 3. If I do 3, it's probably if I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. But ideally, I have been keeping them into two pieces of fabric. It doesn't really matter whether it's 2 or 3. It's up to you. But I'm just using it as is. So this one here, I cut this into 3, and I'm just going to add this piece with it. Again, I'll just put it down there. As you can see, I have really huge pieces of fabric left over. So I could possibly, if I want to, cut them all up into, you know, like squares or something like that. But I really don't want to do that, to be honest. I'm just happy to use it as is. So I'm going to put those front sides together. I'm doing this in preparation for it being ready to be sewn. Alright, so that's why I'm doing it front sides together, and I'm just going to trim it together and straighten up the edge. So this piece will go back there. That's in my bin. And at this time, again, I'm going to measure it down into my 9. And then that's it. And again, just straighten it at the end, so it's already done. So really, it's just literally mindless and start stacking. That's it. So I'm going to keep doing that and get another pile of fabrics going. Right, so something like this already has fabric stuck onto it. All I will do, and I will use it, all I will do is just cut it there to what the requirement is. Alright, but I'm going to start from the end because I do want this in it. So, like that. Let's see what's in here. I have so many scrap fabric that I have stored in many different places. Let me just take it out. Now, I'm not biased as to what fabric I use, I'll be honest about that. As long as I think the colors go together. I am choosing colors together, that I am doing. So, you know, I'm looking to see if the colors actually work. I'm not bothered whether or not it's a Christmas fabric or not. That doesn't trouble me. So something like this. And I'm not ironing the fabrics as they are. I am going to iron before I actually make them into the quilt top. So I'm just going to sew them together. Once I've done that, then I will iron the whole thing. So I'm going to treat it like a block then and just iron it as the block, as you would normally for any quilt top. Alright, again, so that's stacked together. Notice this one is a big and small pieces, so that doesn't matter. So that's just one piece together again. I could use this fabric yet again. And what you can do is something as long as this, you can just go ahead and cut 9 inches, 9 inches, 9 inches the whole time, and then just join it together with other pieces. It does mean though that you will have this fabric repeated, so you got to bear that in mind. So I'm going to use them probably about 2 or 3 times if I have quite a lot of it. Sometimes I may go to 4, but I'm aiming for 2 to 3. So yeah, so that's the whole idea of the quilt, guys. I hope I encourage you to make a scrap quilt. I haven't done one in a very long time, hence the reason why I have so many scraps left behind. And sometimes I stick them everywhere, and some of them are old as well. I can tell some of them I actually brought with me. Can you imagine? I actually brought scrap fabrics with me from the UK. This is a perfect example of that. This bag, I remember. This is scrap fabrics from the UK. Oh, shame on you, Karen. Shame on you. Right, okay, let's see. Oh God, this is so old. This is at least 3 years old, this scrap fabric thing. That's one of the great things I love about making a scrap quilt, is that it takes you back to the quilt you made ages ago. This one here, I'll use this. I like that. I'll put these two together. So this already cut into 9, so all I'll do is just put it front sides and just trim it off. That's it. And it's good to have your small rulers with you rather than having the long, and that's really what I'm using. So again, stack into 2, and I'm just placing it in my little pile. That's it. Very quick and easy. Now, do try to balance out your tones. And when I say tones, I'm talking about the color scheme in your quilt, as well as balance out the tones of the prints as well. So try not to put darks and darks together. Put darks and lights, darks and mediums, etc. Put lights and prints together, etc. Now this is quite bland, but you can liven it up with something. I am also using Christmas print in there. This is beautiful. So something like this will go nicely with this because it is plain, isn't it? So this was, I think, was a leftover fat quarter. I don't know how it got in there, but nevertheless, it's gonna go in it. It's gonna go. So I'm just folding it down just to get a nice straight edge, and I'm going to trim it just to make sure it's nice and straight. And I'm going to cut this into like 3 inches. So I'll just straighten that there. Just make sure. So 3 inches, because again, you can go as wide as you want. It doesn't really matter, guys. It doesn't really matter. So again, I'm going to open this up now. And all I'm going to do is to simply take my strip here, lay it front sides together, and I'm going to cut them into 9 inches. And then I'll have a few bits of this. That's it, and that is a block. So you see how easy I'm doing this. Yes, I'm going to have a few of this, but that's fine because, as I said, I'm only going to get 2 anyway. I'm only going to, I'm aiming to make a large quilt, a large scrap quilt. That's my aim, to make a large scrap quilt. So I'm just going to trim the edge up there. I think one of the ideas of making the scrap quilt is, as long as your edges where you're going to be sewing is nice and straight, then you're good. As long as the edges are nice and straight, because when you put the fabrics together, you want them to come together nicely. I'm not so worried about the bottom area because then I can always trim that straight. Once I sew the whole roll together, I can just trim it straight. So I'm not really worried about that. For me, making a scrap quilt is about using up the fabrics. I'm not worried about perfection here. I'm not worried about making the blocks perfect. I'm not worried about making tiny blocks. I'm not worried about things like that because to me the objective is to use up the fabric. And if that means I have to sew together large pieces of fabric, so be it. But I'm not worried about making sure it's tiny. I think I'll put these 2 together. That will go nicely. So as I said, darks and light, they're both prints, but they will work nicely together. So again, what I will do, I can probably get 2 out of this. So I'll get a long piece of this one and work with it. This is literally a fabric that comes out from making a quilt, as you can tell. It's either backing, yes, it's the backing I use this for, I can tell because of how it's cut. Yeah, definitely. So I put that out there and I'm simply just going to cut bits of this out. That's it. Make life easier for myself. because as I said, I really want to just use up some of the fabrics. So that's it, guys. I hope you've gotten the gist of this. I am going to continue with this, and then what I will do next is to sew a row together and show you what I have done, and then you'll get an idea of where I'm going with this. The layout is going to be simplistic. It's not going to be anything fussy. I can show you that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to get 2 of this here. I can probably get 3, but I'll just do 2. So I have my stack next to me here, and all I'm literally doing is picking them up and then sewing them. Now, in my head, this is a sort of a book method. And what I mean by that is that I'm just simply sewing one seam, open them out, press them, and then start laying them out. So for me, this is a very simplistic, scrappy method for making a scrap. So I'm calling it the book method, all right? So all I'm going to do is chain piece all of them. At this stage is simple because I have already spent the time to just simply put the color placements together, put the scraps together in that book method. So the book could be slightly open. When I say slightly open, for example, it doesn't have to be an equated size. So for example, this one here, it is not the same length, isn't it? So I regard it as an open book, so to speak. And all I'm going to do is simply just add a seam line there. All right. This one is a very good example of that. Again, very easy. Okay, so not the same size. However, I'm still going to add one seam there. So I'm going to continue doing that. And just go ahead and build the blocks. Alright guys, so I've sewn all of the blocks together, okay, and I've laid them out. Now what I wanted to point out here is that, just to reiterate, that I'm using the book method, and by that, now this is just a method I have come up with in my head, so don't go searching for it on YouTube or anywhere else, okay? It is just a method, I'm calling it. So what I mean by that, I'm just taking 2 pieces of fabric, sewing it together, and open it like a book to lay it out, okay? Hence the reason why it's called the book method. Now what I want you to understand here using this method is that once, not all of the blocks are going to be the same size, okay? Remember, I am sort of doing this in the sense that I'm using my strips as they are. They are just strips. Whatever strips I have, I am using them as is. I'm not cutting them into small pieces. I'm using them as they are. Now, what I want to explain here is that once you have laid out all in a row, as you would normally, because the blocks are different sizes, you will find that you would need more or less in one of the rows or two of the rows, depending on the size of quilt you go for. Okay, as it is here, I have 5 rows. I have more blocks that I can add on to make the whole quilt bigger. My important note here though is just to ensure that once you have laid the blocks down, you will then level it off, isn't it? As though it's all equal. But once you sew it together, the likelihood of one row being longer than the next is going to be true. So you have one or two options. One, you could simply add more fabric and make it equated to the longest row, or you can just sew all the rows together and trim the whole quilt top as you would normally when you make a quilt. Okay, but I just wanted to jump in and say that because I think that's important, because as I have noted, you know, the book's block is of different sizes, and yes, you will end up having different length in your rows. So I just wanted to point that out. So for example, this is much bigger than this one. So if I have 3 or 4 of this in one row, then it's very likelihood of that row being longer. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So okay guys, so the quilt is completed. This quilt measures 50 by 57. Now let's have a closer look at how I actually made this. So as you know, I used the book method for building the blocks together. I used swirls for the quilting, and of course you know that this is a scrappy quilt. Absolutely beautiful, guys. Really, really beautiful. Now, one thing I want you to take heed of is that the entire quilt is made from scraps or remnants. That includes the binding. As you can see, it's a piece binding. That also includes the backing. That also includes the batting as well. So, I mean, I made sure and use every inch of scraps that I possibly have to make this. Now, my only regret is that I wish I'd made it bigger. I do have a lot more scraps that I could have added, but to be honest, I was being a little bit lazy. And the colors are just beautiful, isn't it? There is a lot of blue, which is very striking, as you know already. Blue is my favorite color, and it always plays an element in every one of my quilts, whether it's the binding or the backing or within the blocks themselves. The back of the quilt, I use plain fabric, and as I said before, this too is also scraps. This was a piece that was left over from a quilt, and yeah, so I mean, I don't know what else to say. I love it. The binding plays really nicely against the plain fabric. The quilting came out really beautifully. And again, guys, I just simply use my Quilter's Choice, and you know I love it because it quilts so easily. It makes the job done a lot more quickly as well without any stress. Quilting was just fantastic. I don't have anything else to say. It is just really a beautiful little quilt. It's a lap size, definitely. A throw size, I think, would have been perfect, without a doubt. Now, for building the blocks, I'll just remind you that I simply use my method, which is called the book method. And it was just really, really simplistic to use. I did have some pre-made blocks. I'll point them out to you. That's a pre-made block. That here also is a pre-made block, because I do tend to, sometimes, I'll be honest, put together a block once I have finished making a quilt. So if I've got a bit of spare time, or it's just a little bit of free sewing, I'll take some scraps and just make a block together. I don't necessarily worry about the size, the fact that the block is there to be used at some point. I did not use those pre-made blocks, to be honest, because as you know, I did use the method using the book method. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please do me a favor and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. It costs nothing to do so. And I'd like you to follow me on my other socials, Facebook and Instagram. I really appreciate you doing that. And I intend to do a lot more posting of shorter clips on there so that you guys can have a really brief update on what I'm actually working on in the process. So bye for now. Happy quilting. Love you lots. Let me know what you think about the quilt down below. I look forward to hearing from you. And yeah, I mean, I just love it. It's such a really, really beautiful, and the size is just amazing. Now, bear in mind before I go that you can actually use my book method to make an ordinary quilt. Definitely using your fat quarters, using even layer cakes. It will be ideal. You can even use jelly rolls as well to do that. So, see you next week. Bye for now. And yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye.